This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program. This is All India Radio. In commemoration of the Animal Welfare Fortnight, we now bring you a panel discussion entitled Space for All Creatures, Great and Small. The panelists include Ms Anajali Gopalan, acclaimed human and animal rights activist, Ms Ipsita Sarkar of the NGO Straw, Jotvinder Singh, entrepreneur and animal rights activist, and G. Rajaraman, media personality who initiates and moderates the panel discussion.
Hello and welcome to this special show on animal welfare. It's not often that we talk about animals, even in daily life. What we do is we look at them, we sometimes admire them, but mostly we make fun of them. And I think it's very crucial that we focus our attention on how we can be more human, how we can be more humane. And to do that, I'm going to be joined by Anjali Gopalan, who's head of an NGO. She's known for seminal work around HIV and AIDS workers, but today she's going to be talking about animals and all that she loves and the good work that she does. Welcome to our show, Anjali.
Thank you so much.
And I've got Ipsita Sarkar, who is a manager with Straw, which is an NGO which looks after education of people to look after stray animals and to be compassionate. And we're going to talk about the education aspect as well. And we will be joined by Jotvinder Singh, who runs his own firm, but as part of community service, he looks after stray animals and feeds 50 kilos of food every day to strays in Delhi. So wonderful people to have here. Thank you very much for joining us today. Let me start with you, Anjali. How do you define compassion for animals?
As you mentioned earlier, I come from the world of HIV/AIDS prevention and care, and rights has been very integral to the work I do. And for me, I've always loved animals. And I think compassion is a very taught behavior. It's something that we need to teach our young. I remember one of the things my father always said was, children should always be brought up with animals, especially dogs. It makes them more humane. So we always brought up surrounded by animals. And I think that had a huge impact on the way I feel about animals. But I come to my work from the position of rights. Just as I think it is the right of every child to get the best that is available for the child to become a good human being, I think it is the right of the animal to get the best care possible where they can live a life which is not mired in fear and violence. And so I very much come from the rights perspective, and I think it is the right of every child and every animal to get what it's due to it. We are not doing anyone a favor. Let's get that right. And we need to put them at the middle of our intervention, because that's how we are going to bring about change and ensure that we give them the best possible.
Beautiful. We shall get to the rights part of it. I'll stick to the compassion bit a little bit. Ipsita, you tell me, because you are in the field of education, you are in the field of helping teachers and children understand animal care. Tell us a bit about how you see compassion and how you build it into the programs that you have designed.
Thank you so much, and I really agree with what you said, ma'am. So for us, compassion is something which should be an integral part of education somewhere. Because you teach children, and the other thing is children are born with a gift also. They are naturally born with this gift of kindness, with about observation, sensitivity to the world around them. It's just that we need to nurture it. Nurture it, become stronger, even more encompassing to all the creatures around them. So today when we talk about, let's say, humans being mean to one another or humans being mean to animals, where does it begin from? It begins from oneself. So from education, we are teaching children to be kind towards animals, towards other humans also. We are trying to bring in the concept of empathy, because children learn through what they observe around them. I think the world is a big classroom. We look at there's a lot of academic content in our books, but children learn facts. But the way to live life is what children observe around them, and that can be made more integral through education. So that's how we see it.
Thank you, Ipsita. And I know Jotvinder has a very different perspective to compassion. I know for a fact that he thinks that it is ingrained in them because the religion that he practices, he's been taught that you got to feed not just man but also animal. And Jotvinder, what do you have to say about that?
See, the basic and primary need of any living being is food. Like you mentioned about our scriptures and our gurus, we are known all over the world through our seva by doing langar, right? So langar is, eradicating hunger and feeding people. It's not the tummies, it's the hunger of your mind, it's a complete experience. So this is where the compassion comes from. I mean, if we are feeding even voiceless, I mean, there are hundreds of ways humans can ask for food. They can, but these voiceless, they don't have anybody else to look after. We have already encroached upon their habitats. We are already encroached upon their natural resources. So then the entire responsibility again comes to us to at least look at them.
That done with compassion. We're done with a little bit of compassion towards animals and our definition of what compassion is. Anjali, animals are primarily voiceless, and that is why we are the spokespeople for animal rights as well. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do around rights for animals.
I suppose the way I look at rights is to create a cruelty-free environment as much as possible, and especially through law. I feel strong laws protect. For example, we have Prevention of Cruelty to Animal Act in place where for cruelty, the punishment is 50 rupees. Now, you tell me what that means in today's world. But the point is that unless we start looking at putting laws in place which protect, we're not going to get anywhere. For example, today in some states, I know for a fact, there is a lot of dog fighting that happens. Illegal. It's completely illegal. How does one stop it? You have to have at least a law in place, and we don't. It's as simple as that. The laws that do exist are so weak that they are not having an impact anywhere. And let me tell you, when we look at cruelty, research is showing us for many rapists where studies have been done, they find that a lot of that, the first bits of cruelty that come into them is practiced on animals. Do we want to bring about change? Do we want to make this world a better place? If we do, then we really need to start thinking about how we are responding to animals, how we are teaching our young. And that's where what Ipsita said makes sense, is that we really need to inculcate in our young. Because what do we do with our young? We put the fear of animals into them. I'm having arguments with families where they're telling their children, don't go near that dog. Don't touch that animal. It'll bite you. The point is you're putting fear into that child's mind, right? Something that is very unnatural for the child becomes a very natural thing, and therefore fear becomes a part of that equation. Whereas if you think about it, animals are so loving that if you have a relationship with any animal, I think all what it does is it really makes you so much more happier and kinder and a warmer, more humane person. And I think all children should be allowed that kind of education to happen with them.
Ipsita, how do we then remove the fear factor? How do we educate the young so that somewhere down the line we don't see dogfights anymore?
Yeah.
I totally agree with you that yes, fear is one of the main things that we try to, fight. Because fear is something that is also passed down. You see someone who's fearful, you kind of tend to imitate that fear. And it's like a heritage that is going on. So how do we pick up something that is not there around us? Like you look at how do we humans pick up a language? We are not taught our mother tongue, but we still pick it up because we are hearing it all the time around us. So similarly, with fear, that is how that gets absorbed. You look at something, if children see acts of kindness around them on a daily basis, then that becomes their language. A child can do lots. Like let's say they collect their old clothes and they keep it out for the dogs, for the cats, and create a simple shelter. It's a hands-on activity that they are going to remember as well. So these are simple ways in which I think we can inculcate that more in our regular lives for the children.
Jotvinder.
Right. Tell me a bit also about what you did during the pandemic. You run a food service for pets primarily,
Pets.
but you moved into CSR as well, and you started feeding strays during the pandemic. Tell us a bit more about what prompted you to do this and how you go about doing it.
We had always been consistent about keeping a percentage of our profit and keep it for stray feeding. But this pandemic changed a lot of things. The food which was going for pets, it had all of a sudden declined because housing societies locked up the gates. No one should enter. No tiffin or no box could come into that society or their house or something like that. Transportation was again a big issue. So whereas subscription declined to 80%, but my kitchen was always operational because there were stray kids also who we were feeding. So that in fact turned it out when I used to go out in the morning. At the Dhola Kuwa, the I could see 20, 30 pack sitting in middle of the highway. They were stranded. They didn't know what to do and where to go. So I thought, yeah, what exactly is happening? I mean, migrant labor and all other crises were already there. But this was something which just required someone to observe and do something about that. So what I did, I put up a poster stating this is essential service, feeding drive for strays and all that. And at every check post where the police wallas would stop, I would give them food packets. Okay, this is the food. These are the kids who are sitting next to you because they don't see any other human other than police personnel. So they have come to you for help. So this is the food, just feed them. So within 10-20 days, every police barrier wala knew me. Okay, this guy is coming. So they won't stop me. In fact, show me a little respect. Yes, you are doing it for them. So quantity remained the same, but the pet part got just 20% and 80% got into this stray feeding. And we did not want to continue it because we wanted them to get back to their original source of habitat, their original source of food, so that they do not get dependent once the lockdown gets over. So we did that only during that lockdown period.
Let me come to you, Anjali. Jotvinder looks after strays. He feeds strays, of course, as he's just pointed out. But you look after 750 animals and more, right? They are fabulous creatures. Many of them are probably sick or injured. How does this happen? Can you just walk us through what happens when an animal is sick and what is it that all creatures, great and small, do?
I think the kind of, the level of cruelty one has had to deal with is quite amazing. I sometimes wonder how one remains sane. But what is interesting is that animals come into us in a very bad condition. People will send them to us saying, oh, I don't think it's going to survive. And then 4 years down the road, they're still there. And it's nothing but medication, love and care and good nutrition. Things that all human beings need, things that all creatures need, right? I mean, obviously, the kind of intervention you do for each species of animal is different. But this work also teaches you how to deal with death and dying at a different level. It teaches you to love unconditionally. It teaches you to accept love unconditionally, which is also very difficult for many of us, right? We really resist that as much as possible because we are embarrassed for various reasons. But also for me, the way I deal with death and pain now is so different than the way I used to earlier. And I think animals teach you that. Animals teach you how to forgive. I've seen the most horrendous cruelty cases. And to me, it's amazing that that animal who has been treated like that is willing to accept you into its life again, is willing to trust human beings again. And one wonders how they do it. And that is what has taught me, really taught me to learn to forgive, how to really forgive, from the bottom of my heart. It took a lot. I think it's a great teaching, and I'm so lucky to have been able to learn that.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with you a little bit longer, Anjali. Everyone knows that dogs and cats are very loving creatures, that sometimes cows and bulls get injured and you look after them. But I read that you look after emus as well.
Yes.
Right? Now, these are not endemic to India.
Yeah.
How did you adapt to emus? Because I heard the farming went bad and then you looked
especially
after
in northern India. This was something that the government had promoted. I'm sure they thought that it would be something that would help farmers really upskill themselves. Especially in northern India. This is not true for the south and not true for the west so much. In northern India, emu, egg and meat, which is what they were reared for, did not become very popular. And emus are huge eaters, huh? I have about 15 emus and we use 35 kilos of bajra, just bajra every day, and this not counting the apples and the greens and all that we have to give them. So clearly they're big eaters. So I think what happened was that farmers could not afford to keep them anymore. So many were slaughtered, many were just left. And this is not the natural environment. So the ones that we got were birds that had been bitten by dogs. So we got them in like next to the Gurgaon Jhajjar highway, but also the Gurgaon toll. And I must tell you, they are the most fascinating, lovely birds that you can come across. They're really, it's interesting. I have one emu who'll come and he'll want to be scratched on his head. When I get kids to look at them, because it's amazing, we don't know this, but I'm suspecting that at some point, and this is how they evolved, they would have had 4 legs. Now they have 2 and they're flightless. And there is this little extension that comes out from their side, which has a nail in it. So that must have been a leg at some point. So one lives and learns. So, these are things that I think children really need to be exposed to. They need to learn, they need to see what's possible. So I think it is so fascinating to see every species is so different in the way it responds, the way they respond to each other. I mean, I have cats who sit on the emu back and ride. So it's amazing. It's amazing.
Ipsita, how does Draw, for example, take this task of teaching both teachers and students, don't run away from dogs when they're chasing you? Can people actually stand and look at the dogs and stare at them and become friends?
So with children, we use storytelling as a very powerful tool, because sometimes when you instruct children, don't do this, we would like to use positive reinforcement techniques, for which stories are great tools. Why? Because children can identify, relate to characters in the story. So for instance, if we have seen a child who is, let's say, very scared of a dog, like or had a bad experience of getting bit by a dog and has developed a kind of a phobia or a fear, maybe have a story with a central character as a child who had once got maybe bitten by a dog, but what had happened and how he made friends with that dog again, what really led to that transformation. So children listen to the story, and it is a healing aspect also to the child as well as the teachers, because after the story we would discuss it. So this segment is called the stories of kindness. Because if you notice, like in our culture, I mean, animals have been very, commonly used symbols also, especially for children, let's say in the primary school age. Like if you look at Panchatantra stories, Jataka stories, or stories from any culture, of this particular type, will have animals to teach about values. Why is it that they use animals so much? Because children can relate to traits. They can relate to messages that are given through animals. So they automatically have this connect with animals that you would like to use. And for instance, what you were sharing about emu, that's very interesting, because children love to learn also interesting facts. So for example, like we learned that the ant has 2 stomachs, for instance. One is a community stomach and one is its own personal stomach. So in its own personal stomach, it will kind of store food for itself. And the community stomach is for food for others. So when you see ants going in a line, it's basically the share food, excess food that they have got. So that way you're also teaching children about interesting facts on animals, while they are getting some values of sharing, whatever excess that you have with others. So we pick up these interesting facts about animals and tell it to children in which they can apply it in their lives as well.
So which reminds me, as women, I must share this, because, in the case of emus, going back to emus, it is, of course, the female emu which lays eggs, but it's the male emu that sits on the egg and incubates the egg. Talk about gender equality and
That's
parity.
one of your favorite subjects again.
No, I totally agree. So for Father's Day, for instance, we came up with the story of the Papa Penguin and the baby penguin.
Yes, exactly.
So Papa Penguin takes up a lot of responsibilities when the Mama Penguin is very has done with
she's done her bit.
And all. So Father Penguin takes over.
Yeah.
And I mean, these give so many values. Not just teaching about the animals,
How
just
we
general
behave with
empathy
each
and
other.
And
everything.
since we are in the storytelling mode and story listening mode, Jotvinder, would you like to tell us a story of kindness as well, please?
This lady, she has indie dogs, but all 3 of them are handicapped. I mean, one has lost her limbs in railway tracks, another in an accident, and one is blind. So she's keeping them, all 3 of them, together at home, and it's almost 8 to 9 years that she's taking care of them. And it's not a big house that she has. It's a flat. It's a 2 BHK, I believe. It's a 2 BHK flat. And she has 3 kids who require someone to carry them down for their morning walk and then carry them up. And then the food requirements, all 3 have different needs of food. So their 3 different foods are customized and their boxes are labeled. So stories like that, I mean, these are the things which inspire me to do it.
Right.
I mean, I do not get inspired with money. Okay, I'm getting this extra money for my customized meal. But I feel ashamed if I charge extra from these kind of people who are already doing their best for these things.
We've heard these stories, really wonderful. Each one of you telling us a little bit about first-hand experience and about creativity. But are animals really voiceless? When people like you, Anjali, you, Ipsita, and Jotvinder does individual work, I'm sure there are many who do it. Are animals really voiceless? Do you still believe they are voiceless, Anjali?
I think it depends on how you define voiceless. So all of us have ways of communicating. And if that is a voice, then they have the voice. But unfortunately, I don't think we can understand what animals are saying to us, because they definitely communicate. There is no animal at the sanctuary who I do not communicate with, period. Of course, there is this one bull who hates me with a passion. He has to just hear my voice and he's ready to come pawing the ground and bellowing away. And then there is this horse, you know where I am on the premises, because you'll find that she's in that direction. So animals communicate all the time. Dogs, I mean, all of us are used to dogs, right? They're the most common ones we associate with. I know exactly when they bark in a certain way what they're asking for, when they wag their tail in a certain way what they're wanting. So of course, it's how open are we to learn to communicate. But yes, in the traditional sense of the term, they are voiceless because unfortunately, the cruelty that is perpetuated on them does not allow them to respond in a way that is protective of them. And I think to that extent, yes, they are voiceless, but not in terms of communication.
I get that. Tell us a little bit, Ipsita, with CBSE and NCRT accepting modules from straw, as far as education is concerned, has it become a lot easier to tell the world that we can be more humane as far as animals are concerned?
See, we have found a way in which we can communicate, and the question is, how do we measure the impact of our work? Like, of course, we can give content, we can develop stories of kindness. How is it that we measure? We need to, the children whom we interact with, our way of understanding is when they come back to us. They're very excitedly, they share photos of the activities that they have done for the animals around them. For example, we were talking about being voiceless and all. I don't think they're entirely voiceless. It's just that they have a different language, A. And B, it also depends on how sharp ears and observation we have. Because we may be interacting with humans who may be speaking a different language, but we still make it a point to try to understand. With animals, if you observe them, and that is what we encourage children to do, to observe and to kind of understand what their needs are. So that is how we really understand the impact of our work, when we see the kind of questions that children ask, the kind of ideas they suggest. So for example, we were conducting this story of kindness session about elephants, and how elephants belong to in the wild. Yet we see elephants that are being, misused in the name of culture or tradition somewhere. We were having a nice little story about this elephant who was, with his family. So there was this suggestion that came from the child himself. So children, we have realized, are the most, brilliant ideators sometimes. So he said, why, in certain places of worship, why do we have real elephants chained when we can easily, let's say, have a metallic elephant over there? We can have an elephant made of stone. It will serve the same purpose. At sometimes we underestimate the power of children because we might think, okay, they're younger. But no, they think innovatively because they think from the heart. I mean, this is how we know that we have made an impact.
I think when I go back and recall video, Lawrence Anthony's death, fantastic conservator of elephants, Africa, when he died, apparently 2 herds of elephants walked some 3 days to come to his house and mourn his death. They understand man, but does man understand animal? I think that becomes a key question. Jotvinder, I will ask you a simple question. What is it that people can do to be kind? I just want you to tell me 1 or 2 things which are examples of kindness towards animals who you don't know. I mean, you might have a pet at home, you will be naturally kind, it becomes part of family. But animals that you don't know, that are strange to you, how can you be kind to them?
Well, if you give it a definitive term as animal welfare, then people will look at it as they are doing something for animal welfare. But if you try to infuse it in your nature, or why there are no birds over my balcony during summers, and so you just have to observe little things. You just have to put up a water bowl in your balcony for the birds to come, and the chirping sound which you will hear in the morning, that will be your reward. So if you go out and if you see a dog is starving or drinking water from open drain, you just have to give him some biscuits or water. This is the least you can do.
I'll ask you the same question, Anjali. What is it that people can do to show kindness to animals so that it becomes a more equitable world where the animals have got their rights and their voice? What is it that people can do to make it a better world?
Especially in the times of COVID, let me tell you, one of the things that's very clear today is what the WHO also is talking about, which is the one world concept where human beings, animals, and the environment are dependent on each other. And COVID is teaching us that every day of our lives. And if we're not ready to learn, then we're in great trouble. So I think understanding and learning to respect becomes critical. Respect not only other human beings, because that also is a very learned behavior, but also to respect other species and understand that we cannot survive without them. And once we understand that, we learn, we will make the effort to become more humane because our survival depends on it. And basically as a species, we are very inward looking at some level, I feel. So at least if we understand that our life depends on that, or the life of our future generations depend on that, maybe we'll become better human beings and learn how to be kind and compassionate.
Not for nothing did the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, say that a nation is known by how it treats its animals. Ipsita, what can people do to show kindness to animals? What are some simple things that they can do?
Since we were talking about COVID right now, one of the problems that emerged during COVID was that animals were not getting food. The stray animals were not. And because restaurants were shut earlier, what was happening was they would get leftover food from there. So we decided to talk to children about it. Like, how about, having restaurants in front of your home for the dogs around? It was an interesting concept for the children to catch on because they know that there's excess food in their homes. All they need to do is just 2 steps out of the door and put some food in, let's say, on a slab or something. And imagine, you make it interesting for them. Like, imagine dogs will come, cats will come, and they'll see so much food around them. And they can choose where they can go and eat. So the idea was like sometimes how you make children a part of that process. If you are excited to do something, even the ones you don't know, you have to kind of transfer that as well by talking to children about it and turning that into some action. Creatively, think about it in some creative ways. Let's start a doggy hotel, like let's be doggy chefs.
Yes.
So we had this activity about, like a doggy chef activity webinar. We realized that had much more impact on the children because they were all waiting with their sabzis and their knives and the chopping board. Ma'am, when are we going to start this? When are we going to start this? You should have seen with what excitement they went to the gas stove, started cooking, and could actually see, so the doggies are going to have a dawat today. All the cats and doggies and the cows and the birds are all going to have a dawat. All lovely pulao prepared.
Jotvinder Singh.
This is a very fortunate moment for me to meet Anjali ma'am. I take it as a milestone in my professional growth that I had a chance to meet everybody who are equally inclined for compassion and empathy towards animals. So it's my honor, basically.
We can only hope that it is not a day-long activity, but it is a lifelong activity for these people, that they've learned the lessons. Thank you very much, Anjali, Ipsita and Jotvinder for joining us today and in sharing insights into how we can make this world a better place, not just for humans, but also for animals that make it such a beautiful world. Thank you very much.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you.
In our national program of talks tonight, you were listening to a panel discussion entitled Space for All Creatures, Great and Small. The panelists included Ms Anajali Gopalan, acclaimed human and animal rights activist, Ms Ipsita Sarkar of the NGO Straw, Jotvinder Singh, entrepreneur and animal rights activist, and G. Rajaraman, media personality, who initiated and moderated this panel discussion. Produced and presented by Naveen K. Gupta of All India Radio Delhi, this program came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.